Lovers and friends. I'ma take you on a trip, baby, I don't pretend. I said, lovers and friends. I'ma hold you down to the end. I said.
Let's talk about herpes, baby.
Yes,
let's talk about
we're
you
going there.
and me. Let's talk. I didn't know how else to start this
Thanks.
because I know that this is nerve-wracking for you. So I thought we would burst into song.
No, I appreciate that. And you make it much less nerve-wracking because you're so calm about it. You're like, you got this. But it is, because this is not something that people talk about, right? And it's why this was something that I had so much shame around and was a deep, dark secret for so long for me, because it felt like no one else had it, even though we know that's not true. Mm-hmm. None of my friends talked about it. You know, as much as I talk to my friends about so many things that are embarrassing out there, this was one of those things we never talked about. And so, and we spoke about it last year. And after I left your show where we spoke about that, and I thought, this is it, this is my coming out, it was almost like a weight was lifted. But then a weight was lifted also when I found out that might not be airing in a way. It was so crazy.
It was crazy.
And so then in my mind, I said, well, how ready am I to talk about this? Mm-hmm. And so in my mind.
Did you feel like, oh my gosh, this is a sign, Quibi shut down?
Totally. I thought
because that was the universe.
So
Billions of dollars were lost. People lost their jobs because the universe wanted to tell
that's
me.
That's horrible. I'm so sorry. No,
I'm
but I literally left that studio, and the minute I left saying, I just put all my stuff out there, best of luck, Shira, an announcement, Quibi shuts its doors, and I'm like, holy. Then I kind of felt bad, right? Obviously I felt very bad, and you're amazing, and the show is amazing, and the team, and yeah, let's just put that out there. But then in my mind I thought, okay, well, maybe this wasn't meant to be.
Well, this is the thing. Here's the quick recap of an origin story of this, is that I used to work for you when I first moved to Los Angeles. You actually gave me a job at a time that I desperately needed work. And it was so incredible because it was on-camera work, which I was doing photography and I was doing photo booths. And so I think you were the first job that I had that was on camera in LA consistently.
No.
It was a very big deal to me. And I got to go there once a week, which was like, it made me feel like I was in the flow. And it was in Hollywood, and you had a beautiful view in that building. And so you will always be a very special person to me. So thank you for that opportunity.
That means a lot.
And you have always looked for a way to, put me in the fold of whatever you're doing. So you have a radio show, and with Ryan, who's incredible as well. And we finished the show, and I don't know why, but you were like, off the record, I just want to share something with you. And you said, I have herpes and I've been struggling with it. And I had so much shame and stigma. I finally feel like now I have a handle of what I'm experiencing, and overall a handle of the information that people need to have. And I was like, well, great, Shira, we should talk about it. And you're like, no. I just wanted to tell you privately and you alone. I don't want to talk about it with anybody else. And I was like, I think she told me that because she wants me to push her. So I DM'd you and I said, whenever you're ready, Shira, because I honestly cannot tell you. I did counseling for a couple of years, and this was one of the number one thing people came to me with.
You are a counselor.
Yes.
Okay. No, and it's true. And as I've spoken to other therapists about this who are friends, they've said to me, and I actually messaged Chris Donahue before I came here as well, who's a very known therapist. And he said, you know what? Sure, so many of my clients talk about this, and so many people don't know how to approach it in their life.
And it's honestly, I think a friend of mine called me and said, please talk to my daughter because she's having thoughts of suicide because of her diagnosis.
Oh, no.
Which is such a bizarro thing, because I think it's so fascinating about herpes in particular that there is nothing that is going to say this will impact your health or your quality of life or your length of life. So the fact that someone is thinking of ending their life for potentially, a cold sore or an abrasion once every 10 years is crazy, but it's the stigma that really kills. And so I've been so passionate about fighting back against the stigma because that is the biggest side effect of herpes.
It is. It's what are other people going to think? And it's all the ideas that come with it, because in our society, we make fun of it. Comedians make fun of it all the time. And even if you're not a comedian, you make fun of it. I'm in, with friends, and people say, when COVID came up, oh, COVID is the new herpes. when that comes up, okay, if you have herpes, you're like, okay, this isn't a safe space to talk about this.
Yeah,
and these folks don't.
No one's going to the ICU for herpes.
Let's be clear. Yeah, exactly. It is not deadly, and it's an inconvenience at best. And because no one talks about it, no one really gets that it isn't a big deal. So when you get it, you feel like, oh my OMG, my life is over, my sex life is over, no one is going to love me. And just that story creates so much disconnect with yourself and unworthiness. And that unworthiness leads to mental health issues, to questioning why you're here, if you're going to ever be happy or find love. You could see how it's a downward spiral after that. And so when I think we talk about mental health and destigmatizing mental health, we need to include sexual health in that. And that's something we're scared to talk about because we all know what sex means, the conversation around it. A lot of people are not comfortable with that. This is your job. You're bringing it to mainstream media. But does mainstream media talk about this all the time? Maybe from a conversation like this, more people will come out about it. But I've never seen a professional or someone that's known talk about their herpes diagnosis. I've seen them being outed. How many articles or listicles of, oh, these celebrities have herpes, these famous people, like they haven't talked about it, but yet we feel comfortable outing them because maybe this word on the street or rumors, or they were caught coming out of the pharmacy holding Valtrex or something like that. So all of this creates a story that this is wrong, this is bad, this is dirty, and why me?
And it's so fascinating because people shame those who don't disclose. And then if you do happen to disclose, we shame you.
Yep.
So what options are you leaving somebody with? And I always think that whenever people make jokes, I'm like, think about the person who is about to get intimate with you, who sees what you just tweeted, who has herpes and was thinking about how they were going to broach the topic with you. Like what message are you sending to your future partners or your current partner about your attitude towards sexual health when you pass on jokes like these?
Yeah.
What world are you hoping to create? It's such a, and I had told you I empathize with you because I had chlamydia. And the thing that I'm more known for than anything else in the world is this meme that was made about me.
And then when I saw it for the first time, I sent it to Shan. I was like, who did this?
Yes.
Do you want me to hurt them? Do you want me to do something?
Girl, it's so far beyond me. Like it's the thing that is more circulated about me than anything else I've ever done before. People who don't know who I am or what I do will probably see that meme and be like, I've seen that before. It's just been passed around on so many different sites. And what it basically says is my open relationship. And then below it, it says my STD nightmare. And it's this big joke where I'm just like, man, the whole point of me putting any of those videos out is to inform and is to bring down the stigma and it's to put a face to a thing that we usually demonize.
Yes.
And then you turn around and demonize me for that. But then also, if you find out about people who have herpes or gonorrhea or HIV who don't disclose, oh my gosh, the reaction that people get, the anger.
How dare you? But yet are we creating safe spaces to do that? So yeah, we have to approach both sides. Let's be clear. It's unethical to not disclose. And that's not ideal. That is not the go-to that we should be approaching this or how we should be approaching this. And I feel horrible. And I've had so much shame and grief and punishing myself because of moments that I didn't disclose ethically. So let's be clear, like that's not the default that we should be looking at. However, we need to understand why people do that.
Yes.
Right? And then, so if you have herpes, you need to go through your own process of healing that and understanding what that means to you and realizing you're going to be okay and you're lovable and the right relationship and right partner will be there for you, casually or long-term, right? And then on the other side, those who don't have it, I need to get more informed and also work to create a safe space so that when you do have that conversation, that everyone feels like they can be seen and heard. And that doesn't mean that you need to end up with that person. And if you do feel uncomfortable, okay, like you could say, well, this doesn't feel right to me. That's fine. But at least let's create, again, safer, more compassionate spaces to have these conversations. And these aren't things that are taught in school. Like I don't remember learning in school. And of course, I'm aging myself, but like I'm a bit older. we had moral social development, as they say. And I know how much sex ed is being debated right now here in the States.
I've never even heard of moral social development.
That was in Canada.
That's actually pretty progressive.
Yeah, exactly. But I do not remember any sort of conversations around STDs. If anything, it was just like, wear a condom because you can get bad things, right?
Right.
And be careful who you're with. And then it always was associated with someone being obviously like a slut, having too many partners, right? And so I would love, whether it be, and as adults too, or whatever age, us to have a conversation of here's how to make someone feel comfortable and make yourself feel comfortable about having this. So how do we approach this in a healthy way?
Yes, there's a billion different things that need to be added to the curriculum, and I absolutely think that is one of them. I want to backtrack and just hear, what is your story? How did you find out you had herpes? What was your first reaction? Walk me through your origin story. Okay.
Origin story of herpes. National Geographic special. So anyway, I mean, one day after being, I had at the time been with two people. I was single, and I started itching down there. And so, yeah, I was like, okay, maybe it's just an itch. Maybe I have something.
Yeast infection.
Yeah, I don't know. But it kept getting itchy. And then finally, some cold sores. I had
an outbreak.
Look? Oh, yeah, I looked down. Well, I was putting my makeup mirrors, whatever I could find, you know. You find the small mirrors, you're on your bed, you're like, ah.
Was that your first time doing that? How'd you look before?
I feel like I've looked at my vajayjay, or whatever you call it. Everyone has the names. I feel like I looked down there before, but maybe this was a deeper look. But it wasn't like, I know that this is a conversation a lot of people have who have vaginas, that they don't look enough. And it's like a very confrontative experience when you finally see yourself. For me, it wasn't that. It was more like, okay, I got to go down there and see what's going on. And I noticed something off. Yeah, like there was a little, it was like it felt like it looks like a cold sore, but down there.
What does that
little
look?
Bumps.
What does that mean? Like, so does that mean? Because I know cold sores, like I see them when they're scabby, but I don't think that area scabs.
It does scab.
Oh,
so but it first it might seem just like, oh, maybe you have a pimple, and you think it's a pimple, and then you're playing with it.
Would it be where? Is it on?
It could be either on your outer lips or inside your inner lips, not like inside. You could usually see it. Or you have to like flex yourself to see it, you know. So I just noticed something was a bit off and it was itchy. And then I went to my gyno and then they said, well, it looks like you have herpes, but we're going to do a test. And then the test came back and then it was positive. And then at the time when this happened, there wasn't as much, like the internet wasn't what it is today, or social media or any of it. And so I took that and I didn't even have the confidence to go to those people who I'd been with to even ask them. That's how uncomfortable I really actually was with my, I guess you could say, my sexuality and my sexual health. Where one, I wasn't even having conversations like that with people. I'd been in long-term relationships, so I just kind of I hadn't been casual with people. And I didn't even know that process of having that conversation. It's just something that I never did.
Yes.
And I wasn't taught to have that conversation. We have these conversations now. It's normalized somewhat, but not really. I'm sweating. Ooh.
I also don't think that, are you getting that breeze right now?
Oh, yes. Yeah,
Okay,
no,
good.
it's good.
The breeze came on as a sign, okay?
So at the time, it was a very lonely experience. I didn't tell my mom, even girlfriends. Like, I did not tell anyone, and I kept that to myself. And you could see how that's a heavy burden to carry of something that you feel is wrong, that is not going to go away, even though it is manageable and it does go away. You don't live with outbreaks. It's just like anything.
Yes.
But it was so uncomfortable the first time it happened. And I remember going to bath afterwards. They tell you to put Epsom salt and all that. And I just remember just crying to myself, just crying, why me? You know, getting into that mode. And then it went away. And then it was almost like, oh, okay. I went into a bit of a denial. And I almost thought I had cured myself. I did all these things like, I don't have it, like affirmations. It's not there. And because it didn't really come back again, in my mind, I thought, okay, I'm not someone with herpes anymore. Mm-hmm. And that continued for a long time. And I am not proud of that. And I think finally it came to a point where I had to take a deep look at myself and my relationships.
Did you have another outbreak since?
I had it here and there, and even while I'd been in monogamous relationships, I would hide it. Not proud of that. Mm. Like, and it was as crazy as in some of those relationships, I would say, well, they're not showing up for me. They're not fully, there.
Yeah.
And yet I started asking myself, well, am I fully there? Am I fully showing up the way I want to be? Like, look, everything's a mirror for what you're putting out there.
That's such a great point. Yes.
Right. And so it was easier kind of as I was younger and going through that. But as I got older and it became clear, okay, I want to find that person I want to start a family with, get married to a partner for life. I finally confronted the fact that I needed to deal with this and really understand the trauma, because it is a trauma, a physical, mental, and emotional trauma. And I'd never dealt with it. Not once in therapy had I brought it up.
You didn't even tell your therapist.
I didn't even tell my therapist. That's how much in denial I was. And that's how much shame is around this. It was my deep, dark secret. I said I was taking it to the grave. But then it became more obvious as I was learning about these spaces and working on myself, my personal growth, really taking accountability for my life. I realized this is a major thing that I had not processed properly or confronted properly. And I had to understand why. Mm-hmm. What did this diagnosis really mean to me as a person? Because as a diagnosis, once again, which is what the surprising thing, it's not a big deal.
Yes.
It's manageable. Mm-hmm. There's preventatives. There's when you get an outbreak, you take a pill, it goes away in 5 days. It's like anything. Once again, 1 in 6 people have genital herpes in this country, from 14 to 49, I believe. This is from the CDC. 50 to 80% of people have oral herpes. And you can have oral herpes and then go down on someone, or you can give someone from oral to genital. So it's there. It doesn't mean it's good. It's not ideal, but it's not going to kill you. But you know what will kill you is your mentality around it, your emotional health around it. And the messages we're getting from society of what it means. That will kill someone, as you mentioned. And so that's what we need to deal with. And when I finally reconciled that of what I was feeding myself, the hurt and pain I was keeping inside of me.
Did you think about it every day?
A lot of times. When it was amazing, and sometimes I didn't think about it, and it was just like, oh, I haven't thought about it in a while. That's the thing I have. Okay. And then what I noticed is every time I would think about it or get anxious or stressful, just like a canker pops up or you get pimples, it would pop up. And so for me, a big part of coming to peace with it was also really being able to understand myself and my nervous system and what actually brings me peace. Mm-hmm. So you could see how that's a huge, beautiful evolution. So there's a lot of beauty in this when I was ready to confront it. And my hope is it doesn't take people as long as it took me, but everyone has their own journeys. But in more people speaking out, they could realize, okay, I got this. And yes, I get to talk about it and feel it. It's not about keeping those feelings inside, and process what this means to me, because it could mean different things to different people depending on your socioeconomic backgrounds, your race, your gender, privilege, access to healthcare. I mean, it can mean so many different things to so many different people. And so my hope is that the other side of this and this experience for me has really forced me to look at myself and to understand my needs, understand what intimacy really means to me, consent, and also understand that it's okay to be rejected.
Wow. I think that is such a powerful sentiment that is unique and a fresh take. I want you to unpack that more. What does that mean?
Okay to be rejected?
Yeah.
A big fear or in approaching this and sharing with people, specifically because I'm a cis hetero woman, my relationship with men was I won't be accepted and they're not going to want to be with me. Mm-hmm. And saying that now, I'm like, well, fuck that. Fuck those people. If they don't want to be with me, that their loss. But in the moment and when I was going through it, it felt like the worst thing ever. The idea of looking someone in the face, in the eyes and saying, I have herpes. And it's not this one, it's that one. And it was the story I told myself of what they would do and how they would react. Now, that's not fair because that's an assumption. And a lot of people probably might not have reacted like that. But that was in my head what I thought, right? Because of maybe some of them would drop like, oh, are you clean?
Yes.
Or, oh my God. And that person ended up being with someone like talking about someone else's experience. And so when that happens, then you're like, okay, maybe not and you just don't know how to navigate at that point. And you stay inside your head and inside your bubble. And ultimately in really looking at this for me, and when I went to therapy during COVID, I finally went, I've gone to therapy at different times, but this time it was because I had been in something that was bringing up a lot of anxious attachment for me. Read the Attached book. It's really good. So it was bringing up a lot of anxious attachment. And then also part of it was I wanted to get better at disclosing. And she was like, what's the worst that could happen? Well, he could say he doesn't want to be with me. And she goes, well, are you okay with that? Will you be okay if he doesn't want to be with you? And I was like, well, yeah, but it will hurt. She goes, are you okay with dealing with hurt? Yeah, but how many of us want to escape that feeling?
Right.
Constantly.
Yes.
The discomfort of hurt.
But then on the flip side of that, it's living in what feels like a lie.
But then, yes. And that became, as I got to know myself more, that became worse. Mm-hmm. My integrity became more important than that. And as I started looking at my value systems, like I wasn't even, as much as I felt I was pretty self-aware, but I didn't even understand my value systems. Like, who am I as a person? And who do I want to be? And what do I want from the person I'm with? And am I showing up to attract that person? And that's when I had to look myself in the mirror. And that's tough love. When you say to yourself, okay, who's the person you want to be with? And you ask, am I showing up that way? No. I want someone who's transparent, who's loyal, who's in integrity, who wants to have these uncomfortable conversations. Am I having that? Am I doing that? I wasn't fully 100%. So the growth was in saying 100% I'm going to do that. I'm going to talk the talk. I'm going to walk the walk. And in doing that and starting to show up fully, and you're not just showing up fully just for someone else, you're showing up fully for yourself. When you are betraying, or let's step back, betrayal in this case that happens when you don't disclose or you're not having these more intimate conversations. It's not just a betrayal to the person you're with. It's a betrayal to yourself. Mm-hmm. Because you are also assuming that someone's not going to love you for all of you.
You're rejecting yourself.
Yeah. You're basically, so then, yeah, let's get to the next layer of that. How much is it someone else's rejection versus what you've already done to yourself? That's heavy to carry that and also to acknowledge that you've basically also been punishing yourself in the process. And I was doing that for years. And while I appear confident and like, I love myself, I preach self-love, I don't know, like that does not feel like self-love.
It's fascinating because I had this exact same conversation with Eileen Kelly. I don't know if you're familiar with her,
no.
but Eileen Kelly is another sex educator. But Eileen has bipolar personality disorder and felt it's a very similar conversation with that hiding her diagnosis. And actually for the first time when she sat down with me for a podcast episode, she said she had always been saying that she had anxiety and depression. And then we were talking and she's like, actually, I think I want to just share what my actual diagnosis is. She's like, I don't ever really say it because I know it comes with so much stigma, but I feel like this is now an important time for me to actually put a name to it, because other people will get this sense of relief that I know I would have if someone just said, hey, I'm a functioning adult. I'm out there in the world. I'm still loved. I have great relationships. I have a job. And not to say that you have to have all these things to get to a place where you feel confident in ownership, but it's to let anybody else know that you can have this diagnosis and still be a full person and still live a full life.
Yes.
And the similarities between that conversation when I'm having with you is just so fascinating.
Yeah. And when I started doing that work and really talking to someone about it and her saying, well, you know, Shira, so many people have that, right? And I was like, I know, but it just was, for me, it was debilitating. I can't even explain it. And so when I started talking more openly about it, whether it be with people I was with sexually or friends, family, I was telling everyone. I was like on the roof screaming, I have herpes. That was part of my healing and part of my, I'm going to own this. So when I started finally addressing it and acknowledging it and accepting it, acceptance fully, not just in a selective mode, I said, well, let's experiment with really, we're talking about speaking truth and, you know, and owning my power, this next level Shira that I want to be. Well, that means showing up as all of me and accepting that whether someone likes it or not, or accepts it or not. And so part of that for me was sharing my herpes diagnosis. And so I would experiment with sharing it with people and seeing their reaction and how did I feel if they reacted well or not, right? And like what that brought up in my body and starting to be okay with all of it and love all of it.
What was the range of reactions you got?
Well, obviously for friends and people that love me, they're like, oh, well, yeah, there's some people that were like, wow, that's intense. Are you okay? Or like, what is it like? Yeah, because a lot of people really don't know what it's like. There's other people who are older, was like, herpes? Like they grew up in the HIV/AIDS crisis. They're like, that's it? To be honest. And then a lot of also, because I'm very close to lots of people in the LGBTQ community, also like, okay, what's the big deal? Because unfortunately or fortunately, I find the LGBTQ community have much more open conversations about these types of things because it was forced on them. They needed to. Cis hetero folks, we got to step it up because our inability to have these conversations is stifling each of our growth and our intimacy, our ability to be close with ourselves and each other.
Yes. In every study that I've seen about trying new sex toys, sexual adventurousness, consent, conversations around intent for sexuality, the LGBTQ plus community is leading the charge. Yeah.
So we got to catch up. And of course, I told my mom finally, and she's probably listening to this. Yeah, I'm not surprised. And that also hurt. That was a little dagger. Like, what do you mean? Well, you're very open about your sexual needs. You're very sexual. She didn't say that. Sorry, I feel like I'm making fun of her voice. But like in my head, that's what it felt like. And she would always talk to me when she saw me maybe hooking up with people. I would tell her, oh, I'm just dating this person. We hooked up. Or I was maybe back home and had a quick hookup, blah, blah, blah. She was like, oh, you're really, doing things casually.
Yep.
Yeah. And listen, God bless her. But she comes from a different time, right?
Yeah.
So when she found out, she also, and also growing up, we would talk about STDs, but it was based on someone who she knew who had one, and it ruined their life and it was this nightmarish story of getting an STD.
Which it can be.
And
you lived that.
Yeah, but I guess the nightmare stories were more what you could see. Which obviously...
Okay, less about the mental experience as a result of the stigma and more about how, like, physiologically...
Oh my God, this person, they did this and it ruined their face. They got acne all over. Like, it was just these crazy stories I would hear. And of course, you go on Google. Well, we all know not to Google things like that because you're going to see the extreme, which is real. And we all get to know this. But a lot of times it's not that, right? And then... Yeah, I mean, and then of course I told people that I was with, and then I got the whole range from, oh, doesn't everyone have herpes? Even though they didn't.
Did you have anybody say, me too?
I have, yeah. And that was a beautiful moment when it happened. I broke down. Actually, at every point I've kind of at different points, depending on who I was with, I would break down crying, which showed me there was still lots of healing to be had, because it felt like the weight was lifted. Like, okay, what are they going to say? Like, just so much obsession over what this person is going to think about me versus knowing I'm okay. And that's something that I get to grow from and deal with. People pleasing, validation. I mean, we already all have that. Add an STD or STI to it. Well, that's next level then. Because if you don't love yourself and then you add that to the mix, makes it much more challenging. Right? Because you literally don't know what anyone's going to say about it. And so I did have someone I was with who ultimately didn't want to be in a relationship with me long term. And so when he found out, it wasn't worth it to him, the risk. And I got that. Did it hurt? Yeah. And I sat in that hurt. And that's okay also. It's okay to hurt. It's okay to feel pain. It's okay to feel loss or grief. It's okay to, I would like to say it's not okay to feel not worthy and all that, but it happens. Mm-hmm. We're human. So we get to experience these things, but also not unpack there or not say like, this is my identity. It's something that's happening to me. We can witness it, feel it, and then through feeling, letting it go, letting it flow through us. I mean, this is how we approach feelings in general, but including when it's a traumatic feeling. I think that's attached to a lot of things. And so as I went through my journey of that acceptance, I really believe that allowed me to attract the relationship that I'm in today. Because I was finally showing up fully as me, unapologetically, and saying the right person will show up and love me for all of me, because I've finally accepted all
every
of me
detail
as well. I'm not compartmentalizing myself. Well, you might love a bit. No, this is it. This is what I was born with. This is what I gained along the way. And it's all beautiful. It's all part of me. It's not like, and a lot of people who have STIs will say, this is something I have. It is not me. But it's what I've picked up along the way, and it's been part of my story. But once again, I have so many other things that are part of me or who I am that are not that.
Yes.
And that's the important part. And that's the person that you are with or who will fall in love with you will know that. And as I was talking to people and saying, well, what if like it became like the Scarlet Letter? Like, well, I feel like I check all the boxes and this is the flag, the red flag, right? That is what herpes felt like for me. And imagine the limitation I put on myself. Like I put that on myself. No one even had to say that to me, but it was just the feeling and energy from what I knew the world thought of this and what I thought men thought of this was enough for me to create my own red flag of myself. And so when I was ready to say, well, no, that's just part of it.
Do you think prior to your diagnosis, you would have reacted? Were you projecting what your reaction would have been?
Maybe that was maybe that was part of it. I myself wasn't educated. I myself was scared, although I had been with someone, actually, I'll back up. I'd been with someone who had an STD or STI. We keep saying STD, STIs, who had something. And he told me, and I actually was in a relationship with him. So I have been through it where it came from the other side. And I was very exciting. Yeah, I was very accepting of it. Yeah.
Which is interesting because you knew that people like you were out there because you're out there.
Yeah.
But I guess maybe your faith that could happen for you.
Yeah, I don't know. That person who did disclose at the time, I now see that and I'm like, wow, he had so much courage. Because also it's so hard when you're in bed, you're making out, you're there to then go, hey, I need to talk to you about something. I have this. And to be like, you don't need to have an answer. You can take a moment. But when you're in person, that is challenging. So if you have the courage to do that, like that is amazing. And now, of course, I'm in a different place, but you know, and sharing this with my girlfriends, even one of my girlfriends said, oh yeah, I was with a guy once and we were hooking up. And then he stops me saying, if we're going to do this right now, you should know I have herpes. And she's amazing and cool. So she was like, okay. And it was fine. But through telling my story, I've been now hearing all these different stories from people who are like, yeah, doesn't everyone have it? To some people who I know, and women in particular, who say my partner still doesn't know. longtime partner to the point of marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of people living that way. So if you're keeping that to yourself while you've normalized that, think of how much else you're keeping to yourself or keeping in the shadows.
Yes. And knowing that, because at the end of the day, there's details about ourselves that we're not reminded of or we're not thinking about that we forget. There's parts of me that I haven't shared with Jared, for sure. But I mean, they're not things that, one, would impact him and his health or his well-being in any way in particular. And two, they aren't things that I have on my mind. Because I think that it's the weight of the guilt.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you feel guilty that you have it, and then your actions create more guilt around it. And so then you make yourself feel like a more horrible person. And I've had to, through my growth around this, remind myself that I am a good person. I've made mistakes. I'm not perfect, but I deserve self-compassion. I want to build that muscle and have forgiveness for myself and others. And that's what, after I did that Quibi show, I felt very powerful and strong in it. And healing is nonlinear. And so when you asked me to do this again, it was almost like my heart skipped. I felt that feeling in my gut, like, oh, is this maybe I shouldn't do this? Maybe this is putting myself out there too much. Maybe I had my practice run. That was enough. And I remember doing a voice note and almost crying. It brought up still more things, and that's okay. And even today, before I came here, I went on a jog, and after I jogged, I cried a bit to myself. I felt the sadness of the times I'd betrayed myself and others, and reminding myself of forgiveness. And what a sad thing, but also what a beautiful thing.
Shira, I just want to let you know that I talk to people for a living, and I talk about this topic for a living. I don't know if I've ever met anybody who could speak about this as passionately, as informed, and as insightfully as you have, to the point that it would appear to anyone else that you do this for a living. Literally.
What for a living? Oh, talk about
well, I mean, there's a parts of your stories, like I've talked about having chlamydia, right? I've done it, and my video appears in sexual health clinics around certain parts in the country.
Oh, beautiful.
And so I am good at it, and I'm very clear, and I have the information, and I have a handle on my story and what it means to me.
Yeah.
So because I've done it so much, like anybody else, if somebody asks me, how did you start talking about sex for a living? I've told that story so many fucking times.
Oh, yeah.
I could tell it to you backwards in Mandarin. And so this is how this feels coming from you.
Oh, well, it was nerve-wracking for me. I was scared of, words are powerful. So even though I'm speaking my truth, so that's all I can do.
Is it because you've told so many people and you went out there to disclose that you've now become so poised?
I appreciate that. No, I visioned. I had a lot of visioning leading up to this interview. I went into Dr. Joe Dispenza mode. I was like, I appreciate that. I've talked to people, not at this level because I know you're an expert, so it's also different. I'm not an expert. There's also a difference between being an expert and sharing your lived experience. So let's be clear about this too. I'm not saying that I am the be all end all.
But you know what? Expertise is about hours spent, and I would definitely argue that you have spent more hours in this topic than me. So
I've spent time talking about it, unraveling my feelings.
Sharing with others, hearing other people's feelings.
Yep, I've done it all, and I continue to do it. And I am very passionate and curious about mental health, emotional well-being as I continue my work. My work's been as a broadcaster and interviewer, and that has come out through interviewing. And now what I feel, and in interviewing, I never really looked at myself. It's an easy way to deflect when you're always asking other people questions. And as I've started to ask myself questions, I've really had to force myself to look within and understand myself and what I want to share with the world, and what truth means to me, and what freedom means to me. So that's been a big part of it. And I've prayed a lot coming into this interview, a lot of prayer. I mean, I'm a Jew boo, but like I wanted to make sure I was making people understand these things and share complete sentences and not say like and ums and all those things got in my head. And I said, the more that you think about those things, the more that it's going to come up. But I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's been phenomenal. And with that, there are a lot of people who are watching, and the question I get a lot is when, how, where do you disclose? There's probably no one size fits all perfect answer.
Options. Once again, and the SDI project, I just suggest everyone goes there because she is amazing at talking about all this. She's an advocate. She's a sexual health educator. Please check her out because I've gone through my own experience, and then I also checked her out in terms of getting more informed and educated. And I think a lot of people who are in the space will say there's different ways to do it, right? On dating apps, you can disclose. You could literally say, I have this. And so sometimes it's easier. And she shared this, and she has this whole disclosure video, which is amazing. I suggest you check it out. And sometimes it's easier because at that point, you don't have the emotional bond yet. Mm-hmm. When you connect with someone, you start talking to them, it's harder to face that rejection or possibility of it.
I did a course, for lack of a better term, with somebody who worked at a dating app, both OkCupid and The League. Mm-hmm. And I asked about best practices, and both of them said it's important to have a weed out photo or weed out detail about yourself. If there's something about you that you know is going to be a make or break for people, mm-hmm. it's better just to put it in your profile.
Yes, get those people who are not supposed to be in your life out of your life. Create that filter. A lot of us are scared of a filter because we want choice. And we want everyone to love us. That sounds amazing. Well, guess what? Not everyone is going to love us. So make that decision for them and make that happen earlier than later. Because then you're just going to have to deal with all the feelings on the other side of that when the wrong person ends up in your life and continues to be wrong and ends up leaving. And so that's going to happen inevitably. Have it happen earlier rather than later.
I guess the hope would be that when somebody gets to know you and sees you as a human being,
totally,
they're more willing to accept the details.
I agree. However, the person you're supposed to be with or should be with, no, I don't want to create all these judgments, but even my friends told me this. They're like, the person that you're going to be with, even without knowing you, I wanted to at least be with someone that would be accepting of this. Even without knowing someone. So if we were friends in a circle and I would mention STDs, they wouldn't be the one making fun of it or saying I wouldn't date that person.
Because it's about values at that point.
It's about values. So yeah, of course they could get to know you. Anyone can get to know you. And people can learn. We gotta give people the grace and space to learn. However, I also knew I wanted to be with someone right off the bat who was open and accepting of these things, whether it was me or not. So that's why for me, it is like that is a deal breaker. If you even just saw it plain blank without even knowing anything, would you be willing to go there? Would you take that step? I want to be with that person who would take that step, whether they knew me or not. And so that for me was the thing. And that's a very personal thing if it matters to you. It could be scary and not safe for you to do that because people could see your profile. You made friends, family, your colleagues, your work. So that might not be for everyone. So let's be clear. And I'm sensitive to that. There's the other way, which is text. You can get to know someone a bit, but you see it's moving towards something sexual. Text them. Pick up the phone then. FaceTime. I would say in person if you're really safe and comfortable. You really feel like you know this person. You feel it's okay. Because you just don't know how someone's going to react. And you want to make sure it's safe. First and foremost. And so I think those are the different ways that work so you can disclose ethically.
How did you share with your current partner and what was their reaction?
My current partner, we'd met through a friend. We were all friends. And then we went from the group friendship mode to the one-on-one friendship mode. And that's when we started to get to know each other. And it was over a month in COVID, which is like 6 months or a year in real life, non-COVID time. And so we got very close. And then when I went out of town and he met up with me. And at that point I knew we had acknowledged that we liked each other, that there was something here we wanted to navigate. And so he came up on a Friday night and we made out. At that point I knew I was going to have to tell him, but we didn't do too much. So in my head I go, okay, I still have some time because it was really late at night when he got there. It was like, and that's what's hard. You get in your head. That's why it's also not worth it, not disclosing how you just can't be present. You can't be present with that person and then add in the values and the integrity, right? All that stuff. And you could be pushing someone away. Like I've had some people who I ended up sharing with who said, I wish you had just told me from the beginning. And maybe I would have given this a shot, which sucks to hear. But anyway. So the next morning we're taking a shower and I felt that we were probably going to have sex that day. And I said to him, I have something to tell you. We're in the bathroom, naked. I don't know why I'm giving all these details, but it was a very vulnerable moment. And I say, I have herpes and you need to know this before we're sexual together. And he's like, babe, okay. Thanks for sharing. I love you. It's all good.
I love you.
Oh, did he say I love you at that point? Maybe,
You felt loved.
I felt loved. I felt acceptance. I felt it was okay. And I actually broke down. For me, it was a breakdown moment of feeling all those times that I'd been with people that I really cared about and ended up loving and having a lack of transparency there and a lack of feeling like I could show up fully, not because of them, just because of the pressure I put on myself and the story I was telling myself. It was like I saw all my relationships and everything I'd been through flash through my past, like right before my eyes. And then I was finally in this moment with this person that I saw could be someone who could be a future partner. This was like possibly the one. And I said, wow, I've come such a long way.
Dr. Ina Park is an associate professor of family and community medicine at the University of California, San Francisco, medical consultant at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Division of STD Prevention, and medical director of the California Prevention Training Center. She is also the author of Strange Bedfellows, which is an incredibly important book that blends science and storytelling and historical tales and real-life sex I told you guys I was going to get tripped up. Sexual escapades and interviews with leading scientists in order to erase stigmas attached to STDs and STIs like herpes. Chapter 1 of your book, let me hold it up because you know I'm obsessed. Strange Bedfellows. It's a book that I just literally reference all the time. Chapter 1 actually is about herpes. Is that on purpose? It's called Killing the Scarlet H.
It is completely on purpose. It was totally intentional because that is the STI for which I get the most questions, for which my patients are most concerned. When they get the diagnosis, they, feel devastated often. And I think the stigma is way overblown. And so that's why I wanted to lead with that. And I just think, let's put that in perspective. I mean, people, when they come out with an STI diagnosis, they get slut shamed. Like they're out there trying to be sex positive, trying to advocate, trying to normalize STIs. And they get slut shamed by people saying, I've even had folks who are out on social media having people say, you deserve to die. You don't deserve to, have a sex life because now you're unclean, whatever, infected, contaminated. And so, yes, people are hesitant. The more people we have like Shira, the more people we have out there who are saying, yes, I had an STI and I'm fine. You know what I mean? I'm living with it, or I cured it and I'm fine. The more people we have like that, the better we're going to, get in terms of cracking the nut around stigma. And, so I tell people all the time, I've had at least one STI that I know of. I had HPV for a couple years, and that's a super common STI that everybody gets. And herpes is right up there in terms of how many people have it. And, in fact, as you know, Shan, more than half of us in this country have at least one type of herpes. So why are we going to go around slut shaming people for something that most of us have? It doesn't make any sense.
Okay, so scenario, you're at a dinner party and someone is talking about someone that they just were about to hook up with. And they said, yeah, but I found out that person had herpes. And then somebody across the table is like, guffaw, they had herpes? What did you do? How did you react? That's so terrible. Are you safe? What would you respond with?
So I would start with my actually speech and I would say, hey, actually, do you know that most people actually have one form of herpes, and you probably have herpes and you may or may not realize it? And the other thing I would say to them is, just so you know, whoever you're sleeping with, you're more likely to get you're more likely to get herpes from someone who doesn't know their status and is walking around shedding virus than someone who actually knows their status, is taking care of themselves, is taking their medication and their suppression, is actually less likely to transmit to you because they're going to avoid having sex with you when they're having symptoms. Whereas other people who don't know their status are just having sex willy-nilly, and they're the people that are actually more likely to infect you. So that's why I tell people, have sex with people who are living with herpes. Do it. because these are not the people who are taking care of themselves and who are avoiding sex when they feel an outbreak coming on are not the people who are going to give you HSV. They are the people who don't know their status.
Fascinating. Because interestingly, even you just said about like the antiviral drugs, I have heard that a lot of people don't have to continuously take them. Is that because I know obviously with PrEP, it's a lifelong engagement at this point that you have to keep continuously taking PrEP. And once you stop, the efficacy goes down. I'm unaware that the same system was in place for herpes outbreaks.
The first couple of years that somebody gets a herpes, after someone gets a herpes diagnosis, they are more likely to be shedding, more likely to have outbreaks. So those are the years where transmission risk is the strongest. And so taking suppression every day during those years can actually, greatly reduce, like it can reduce by 50% or more the risk of transmitting to another partner. After that time period, if you're not having any outbreaks, then the choice to go on suppression is kind of like an optional thing. So if you do want to prevent transmission to partners, we do know that you will be shedding, even though you have no outbreaks, you'll probably be shedding, for about 3 days a month for the rest of your life. And so you can take, antivirals to just reduce that risk even a little bit more of transmission, but it's not something you have to do. With HIV PrEP, as you mentioned, which is kind of like a birth control pill for HIV, once you stop taking it, that's it. You're, just as vulnerable as you were prior. It's not like when you're actually living with herpes or HSV where it starts, it's really kind of prolific in the beginning and then it starts to burn out, over time. But again, someone who's living with HSV is going to be shedding a little bit for the rest of their lives, and they should expect that.
I had no idea that there was actually down to the number of days. So do you know for the first 2 years what percentage of the time somebody might be shedding?
So that's completely variable, Shan, because some people in that first year will have like 6 outbreaks. And so that means every time during the outbreak and leading up to the outbreak, that means they're going to be shedding virus. So, and then some people actually have 1 outbreak and they never have an outbreak again. So this whole sort of guide for 2 years is kind of the average of, what people experience. But there's a huge range of people's experience, that depends on someone's immune response.
And then to be clear, the suppression really is about comfort, and it is about preventing transmission, but it's not about quality of life.
No, I mean, well, some people, when they have outbreaks, it really messes up their quality of life. So they're taking it for that reason, but you don't have to do anything. You can have HSV, herpes simplex virus, you can live with it and you don't actually have to take anything if you don't want to. And again, you just do it based on how your body personally is responding to the virus. So if you're one of those people that has had no symptoms, there's no reason you have to take medication unless you, want to prevent transmission with a specific partner. But again, it's an optional thing. It's not like when you're living with HIV. If you don't take medication, you will get sick and then eventually, you can get a life-threatening illness. So it's not on that level.
What level is it on? So I know in terms of, like you said, it is quality of life, and it is the social stigma around herpes is massive. But are there any other health complications that somebody with herpes has to be mindful of?
So I think if you're living with herpes, if you're a person who can become pregnant and you become pregnant, then, in that last trimester before the baby is born, to take suppressive medicine to prevent transmission. But otherwise, it's really, there aren't any long-term health effects on fertility, effects on sexual function, sexual pleasure, ability to orgasm.
So let's talk about disclosure in light of that. In light of
Yes.
all that you just said, how important is disclosure?
I mean, I think it's important. And one of the things that we have talked about in the past is like, well, when do I tell? That's the hard thing. Like, do I say it? Do I lead with it as soon as we start to get to know each other? Do I wait until we're already emotionally invested and then tell you? And these are hard decisions. And I will tell you sort of what I've learned from talking with many, many patients who've been living with herpes is that the time not to do it is when anyone's clothes are off or coming off. Have that conversation beforehand. And some people say, because I have been rejected in the past, I like to tell people before I get emotionally invested. I mean, my personal opinion is nobody should be rejected because of herpes, given the fact that you're more likely to get it from someone who doesn't even know their status, who's, walking around shedding asymptomatically. But the fact is that some people, for their own protection, to protect your own heart, you're saying, before I get too into this, I am going to disclose this. And if they can't deal with it, then I'm just going to walk. And to let them know, if you are living with herpes, what you're doing to take care of it, to let them know, hey, I've had herpes. Um, I'm not having any outbreaks, for example, for the past 3 years, and I'm taking medication every day. And that's your little mini TED talk, and that's all you can say. And I actually don't think it's your job for the person who's living with herpes. Like, it's not your job to educate people. I feel like people need to go out and educate themselves. But if you feel like you want to share information, that's up to you. But I also feel like it's everybody's responsibility who's sexually active to get informed.
And the flip side, if you're someone listening to this and one, you don't believe that you have herpes, or two, you're part of the population who hasn't got tested and is unaware, which we can also discuss the nuances around testing in herpes. But if you're part of that percentage of the population and someone tells you that they have herpes, I'm hearing from you some of the questions that you should ask are, what are you doing to take care of it? To, when was your diagnosis? Is there anything else they should ask that would be important information for them to make the best decision for their own health?
I mean, I don't think so. I think those are the two main important things. The other thing I was going to say is there are some things not to say. So the first thing is, like, first of all, watch your face. Like, practice, like, think about someone telling you this and practice keeping your face neutral, and don't make a face. Don't say ew, don't, like, curl your lip up or whatever, like you just smelled something bad. I mean, how you react when someone discloses to you is going to set the stage for possibly this relationship moving forward, right? Or not. So fix your face and watch your face. That's number one. Number two is don't ask people where you got it. You know what I mean? Because most of the time people don't know. And we can talk about that too, Shan, about like trying to figure out where you might have gotten it from and who might have given it to you. But most of the time people don't know, and it's really not your business. You know what I mean? They could have gotten herpes from, they could have had one partner in their whole life before meeting you, and that could be the person that gave them herpes. So don't make assumptions about the fact, like, how many people have you slept with? You know what I mean? Those kinds of questions that kind of allude to someone being super sexually active, or like that kind of, toy with the whole slut shaming thing. Don't go there. So those are sort of my pieces of advice in terms of how you should react. The only good reaction to hearing that news is, thank you for telling me.
Mm-hmm.
And like, and if you kind of like this person, be like, you know what, we'll figure it out. And like, you don't have to say like, okay, I'm ready to get it on right now. Just say like, I need a little bit of time to like think about this, and I want to do some reading or whatever, but we'll work it out. Like, if you feel like, that maybe you could move forward with this person.
And what are sexual activities that you can still continue on and do with that person while you are figuring it out and researching and reading? Like, does that mean intimacy has to stop until you gather more information, or are there still some safe things people can participate in?
Right. So if people have genital or anal HSV2, right, which is the kind that most often causes recurrent outbreaks, that is a virus that does not live very well in the mouth. So if you were to like give someone oral sex, you know what I mean? And let's say you're obviously not going to do it when they have an outbreak going on, or if they feel like something's going on. So oral sex in general is not, off the table, I would say. If you are really concerned about getting HSV2 in your genital area or your anal area, and your partner discloses to you that they have HSV2 down there, that would be like something I'd say, well, let's use condoms. You know what I mean? I would actually say nothing is off the table.
I love that. And so we lightly talked about the tracing element of things, of people's initial response when they get herpes. I mean, let's actually go from that standpoint. From when do you get transmission? Will you see your first outbreak? And is it logical or even beneficial to start at that point thinking backwards to who might be the person who passed it on to you?
Yeah, Shan, don't go there. That's all I'm going to say to you is don't do it. You're tempted. Everyone's tempted to do it. I'm telling you, it's the first question that everybody asks me is like, how did I get this and who gave it to me? Don't go there. And I'll tell you why. So, okay, let's say that you have done nothing with anybody and no one's been down there, hands, fingers, nothing, right? Or mouths or penises or whatever. And then you get your very first outbreak. And this is the first sexual contact of any kind you've had with anybody. Okay, then you know who gave it to you, right? That's really the only situation. If there's been more than one person down there at any time, it is going to be impossible to trace. And I'll tell you why. Because most of the time, once you get exposed, if you're going to have your first outbreak, you will often have it like within a week to 10 days of that initial exposure. But there are people whose first outbreak is so mild that they don't even know it's happening. And then they don't actually get an outbreak that they recognize for 2 years or 3 years later. So you're going to blame it on the wrong person. So the only way to do that is, you've heard of the PCR swab, right? Because we're all getting them for COVID, Shan. You can get a PCR swab if you have a lesion on your butt or your genitals. And if your blood test is negative, but that swab test is positive, then you can say, oh my gosh, the last person I slept with gave this to me.
Fascinating.
If your blood test is positive and that swab test is also positive, you have no idea when you got it.
And then to your point, I mean, from a public health standpoint, like I've had chlamydia. And when I had chlamydia, the question that they ask is, who are your last sexual partners? Because we have to contact them from a public health standpoint. Does that exist in the herpes community?
Not at all. And in fact, that is such a great point, Shan, because when you have chlamydia or gonorrhea or trichomonas or mycoplasma, like any of these bacterial or parasite infections, you should trace back and say, okay, who have I slept with in the past 2 months? It really could be any of those people, and make sure all those people get treated. When it comes to herpes, again, because most of the time people can't pinpoint who was the person who gave it to me, there isn't this whole like sort of contact tracing. We all know about contact tracing from COVID. We don't really have a system in place around that for herpes.
If there was a virus that over 50% of the population had, we should all know about it. So there is a virus that over 50% of the population had, and yet most people know very little information about this. So why is that? And what can we do to change that?
I mean, I think one of the things we need to do is we need to be testing more. And the reason why we're not testing more, Shan, is that the tests that we currently have right now are not very good. And they tend to give a lot of false positive results. And so providers like myself are kind of afraid to use them, because you don't want to give somebody a diagnosis that isn't true, and something that they need to disclose and live with psychologically for the rest of their lives. So the CDC just released new guidelines actually 5 days ago, and they actually recommended doing a 2-step process now for making a herpes diagnosis if you're doing a blood test. In the same way, Shan, that we used to do for HIV, where you would get a test and then you get a confirmatory test before you tell someone they have HIV. We have not been doing that for herpes, and the CDC now recommends that we do. So what my hope is that laboratories will adopt this 2-step method, and then, providers and clinicians like myself will then begin to order more testing, because really anybody who gets an STI or anyone who's at risk for STIs should also be getting tested for herpes. But we're just not doing it until we get better tests, and I'm really hopeful that we're going to be getting those, in the next like coming year to 2 years or so, because the CDC is now recommending we do this 2-step process.
I want to have in closing, a magic school bus moment where you take us through what exactly is herpes. How does it enter and live in the body? If we were to enter the body right now of somebody living with herpes, where would we locate it? And what would it be doing right now?
Yeah. Let's imagine 2 people having
I always
sex.
imagine that all day long.
I know you do. I know you do. It could be 2 people having anal sex. It could be 2 people having vaginal sex. But anyways, skin is rubbing up against skin. And when that happens, as you know, there can be little like micro tears in the skin, which is why we always say use lube and make sure, you're lubricated enough, because that will reduce that. But let's say there's little tears happening in the skin. This tiny virus is getting in to that little tear in the skin, and it's finding a nerve. As you know, there's lots of sensory nerves down there. It's then traveling. It's actually, the virus is traveling along the nerve, and then it's going into your spinal cord, and it's going to sleep for the most part. Most people don't recognize that they have herpes, right? So it's just sitting there. And, if you actually end up having an outbreak, you will get a local reaction where the virus will start to replicate and multiply. And then you'll get, as the cells get full of virus, then they're going to open up and cause a little sore. But let's say that doesn't happen for you, and you're one of the majority of people where, you don't notice anything. That virus is just sitting in your spinal cord, down near the bottom where your pelvic nerves are. Something happens later on where you get stressed out, or there's some sort of like trauma down there or whatever, the virus will actually travel back along the nerve back to the skin surface at the original point where you actually got infected, and it'll cause a sore there. So for people that get recurrent herpes, most of the time, the first outbreak, you'll get sores on both sides. And then in future outbreaks, you usually only get a sore on one side because recurrent outbreaks, just tend to work that way. But again, you could be one of those people that never had an outbreak in the beginning, and then 3 years later, that virus travels back along the nerve and comes out on your genitals and appears. And you're like, what the hell? How did this even happen? So,
which is why it has the nickname cold sores, because of the fact that when you are immune compromised to some degree, that's when you're likely to see an outbreak occur.
Exactly. Yes. And, some people for HSV1 will just get it even if they get exposed to the sun. But yes, any kind of stress, any kind of cold or other illness will absolutely, bring it out. But my point is, Shan, is like...
that's an asshole of a bug. It's like, you're already having a tough time. Let me come and fuck with you some more.
I know. And you know what? And of course, like, none of us want it. But again, none of us want COVID either. Like, we have to live with these things. And unfortunately, they affect the parts of our body that we use for the greatest pleasure and, and enjoyment. So it's just, we just got to accept it and learn how to live with it. But my point is that this virus is super good at hiding from your immune system, because if your immune system could see it, it would go, hell no, and try to get rid of it, right? But it's very, very good. It's very good at avoiding detection from the immune system, which is why people are able to live with it for 20, 30 years or whatnot.
Which is actually interesting. That's something I heard about. An effective virus actually does the least amount of damage, because if it causes a lot of damage and it kills the host, then there's no way for it to spread and survive. So an effective, it's like a bad guest, right? Like a family member who wants to live with you. It's your unwanted cousin. If they're loud and obnoxious and annoying, you're going to kick them out. But if they just kind of hide out in the attic and keep quiet and just eat a little bit of food at a time, you might just like ignore them and let them stay there for an extra couple months.
Yeah, and that's why we've had this virus around for like 3 million years, is what scientists have hypothesized. So it is so clever at just hanging out and not causing enough ruckus that you're going to throw it out on the street. You know what I mean? Your immune system just says, fine.
Just live in the attic. Just
live there, and now I got to deal with you.
So herpes is not the Scarlet H. It's the annoying cousin.
Exactly. And that's how we should look at it, and not my life is over, but now, man, I have this like annoying thing I have to deal with, and I have to tell people when they come over, my cousin is in the attic, but it's fine.
I haven't seen them in years, but in case they come down, you should know.
Lovers and friends. I'ma take you on a trip, baby, I don't pretend. I said, lovers and friends. I'ma hold you down to the end. I said.